have the choice which one you prefer. Either way. So I think we can start, right? Well in time. So a very warm welcome to all of you to a special session in these times. A spotlight on Afghanistan. I want to welcome in our panel Fawzia Kofi, a well-known human rights and women's activist who is now in exile. She will give us her insight from the Afghan perspective. Very happy to have you here. We have Hina Rabbani Khan, who was a female minister of Foreign Affairs in Pakistan, very interesting position, and who is now a member of parliament. And last not least, we have Congressman Jason Crow, who was serving as a US Ranger 2 times in Afghanistan, and who is now very engaged in the future of the country, and interesting to hear also your perspective from the American side. So what we see currently, and what makes this session especially interesting, is a power struggle in the Taliban leadership. So Fawzia, is this a moment where you see momentum for a change for Afghanistan, for the democratic movement? You will have a session, like a congress in Vienna next week where you will meet. Is this momentum for Afghanistan?
Thank you, Katrine. It's a pleasure to share the panel with the distinguished panelists. And I'm glad that the Munich Security Conference have a spotlight on Afghanistan, because with the competing agendas, we always get this feedback that Afghanistan probably has fallen from the radar, which in reality, the situation has only gotten worse day by day for the people. So Afghanistan not being in the spotlight or in the headlines does not mean that the situation has improved. On the contrary, every day it gets worse for the people. When it comes to the power struggle, I think one of the characteristics of the Taliban was that they're a united force.
Yeah.
Their existence was based on the unity that they have demonstrated throughout their existence since 30 years. Lately, we see that there are divisions. I don't think these are ideological divisions. I think these are the divisions, and the fragmentation is rather over power. It's between Kabul and Kandahar, between the hardliners, so to say. But I feel this is a power struggle. And I think the more international pressure is exerted, especially the recent decision by the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which requested arrest warrant of the 2 Taliban leaders, I could clearly see that division and fragmentation is amplified. And in fact, Kabul really looked like a military city in that day, as well as Kandahar. Each side was trying to strengthen the position. So a possible scenario, if this division continue, is that there will be further and further division by the leader making his position, the Taliban leader making his position even harsher. I don't know what is left.
How can it be harsher? It's already very harsh.
I actually wanted to come to that. When it comes to suppressing women and edicts to suppress people, nothing left to make it even harder and harsher. But I think he will be harsh on his own cabinet, in his own government officials, in terms of not allowing them to publicly have a statement against his edicts. And in Kabul, I think the reaction would be probably even further opposing him. So that will lead to an opportunity, as you mentioned, for a possible political process, because this is the prospect that we were hoping to happen in Doha. But the way the Doha process was managed, the way the negotiation was managed, did not lead us, especially the withdrawal, it did not lead us to a political settlement. It actually, on the contrary, led to handing over Afghanistan to Taliban. And the Taliban said they are changed, Taliban 2.0. But since they have returned to power, they have made Afghanistan a hell on earth for women and for everybody. And I think the more the world just sees them as a reality, the only reality, not the rest of the society, it will only embolden them. Because since 2021, Catherine, there has been more than hundreds of engagement with the Taliban.
That's a very interesting...
I want to know from all of those who engaged what the outcome of this engagement was in terms of supporting changing the lives of people.
Very interesting point, which leads me to your position, Jason. You have been fighting the Taliban as a US Ranger in Afghanistan, and after the withdrawal of international troops, especially the US, you have tried to engage in the country. And we have this dilemma that on the one hand, we want to not to support Taliban, but on the other hand, we have a more and more suffering population. So how do you deal with this problem?
Thank you for having me. I mean, it's an honor to be on the panel with such incredible leaders and advocates that we have up here. What this requires is a very honest discussion about the path forward and what our objectives are. I went to war in Afghanistan, and now I would call myself a lifelong Afghanistan advocate. And rights advocate. My role has changed. My focus has changed. And when you end a conflict that you did not win, which we did not achieve our objectives, many of them, they were twofold. One was to keep America safe and to deprive Afghanistan from being used as a platform for the launch of external terrorist attacks. And the second,
sorry to interrupt. Let's focus on the current situation. I think the failures of the past, that we are all familiar with this. The question that is interesting in the moment is, how do we deal with this government? On the one hand, the question, can we support Afghanistan with money, aid? Do we also support the Taliban?
I was leading up to that. Right? The context, the history dictates the future.
Okay.
To some degree, right?
Yeah.
So if our objectives were to prevent terrorism, and to develop democracy and to protect the rights of the Afghan people, then if we still carry those objectives forward, the question is how do we do that? And in my view, what it requires is a very honest discussion about whether or not there's a way to engage with elements of the Taliban to effectuate both of those goals, right? And there's a lot of people who will say in the United States, no. Taliban is a foreign terrorist organization, like they're all in the same bucket, we treat them all the same. No. I take the belief that if you do that, we actually undermine our ability to pursue our goals and to advance not only our interests, but the interests of the Afghan people, who I continue to care deeply about. Right? And this is hard. Is there a way to, with a carrot and stick approach, figure out, are there elements within the Taliban who want to move towards normalizing, who want to join the outside world, who want to start moderating, and they're in conflict with other elements of the Taliban? Is there a way to engage with those elements and to promote the rights of women and girls, get women back into school, have the flow of humanitarian aid, continue demining operations, and support those elements and encourage them to moderate their behavior while we continue to push away the more ideologically driven severe elements?
Let's bring in the regional perspective. Pakistan has been a supporter of parts of the Taliban. And if I see the situation right now, even Pakistan starts to criticizing and to seeing the Taliban as a threat for the security of the region. Can you tell us your perspective?
Okay, first of all, I think Pakistan is a country which has a 2,700-kilometer border with Afghanistan. Pakistan is a country which has lived through the impact and the effect of not only one experiment or, whatever you want to call it in Afghanistan, but twice. And we were in some ways, given our strategic location, as we call it, which has not really gone in our favor many times. The first experiment required a lot of mujahideen to be trained with a lot of foreign funds which are coming from Western countries, which put in extremism into the souls, minds, hearts of people on both sides of the border. And we had to deal with the consequences as the world exited. Guess what? The world exited again, a hurried exit, 2021, and we have to again deal with the consequences. So I think that's the reality. And I think the historical perspective in terms of what happened in those 21 years of engagement in Afghanistan, and what the results of that was, it was $2.3 trillion, 38 million people displaced, and 243,000 people, 67,000 of them in my country, died as a consequence of that. And we did not see an end to extremism or a lessening of suicide bomb attacks or any of those consequences. In fact, we saw an escalation in malnutrition. 2001 to 2021, we saw an escalation in poverty. We also saw, of course, women going to schools, and then the 2020 handover in some ways to the Islamic Emirates basically put everything up in the air, and whatever came out of it came because interests changed. That's the reality, right? So now where we are, I am a diplomat. I have been in and out of this job, almost 15 years now. There is a reality of 43 million Afghans who are living on Afghan soil. So when you say disengage completely, isolate, to what purpose? In diplomacy, typically, even your worst enemies, your worst, nemesis, people who you do not agree with at all, you have to try and engineer a change. You have to try and cultivate a change. You have to try and encourage a change. And yes, we are all very, very desperate right now, and we all have our hand up.
What makes you so desperate and critical? How do you see the actual situation?
Look, as I said, we had 700,000 people coming in 2021 inside Pakistan to take care of. We have a lot of people in Pakistan to take care of ourselves. Now, with that, that's not the story only. With the ammunition and the weapons and the sophisticated gadgetry that was left, TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which happens to be like the red line and the entity or the organization which has been very costly to us in terms of lives, has been able to kill with impunity. And that is obviously something that every country would like to put its security stability before anything else. However, we also have to understand that the regional security stability, when you have these borders, it permeates through the borders and comes into each other's countries. So what we've tried to do is to really build a coalition of the willing, so to speak, within the region, with Uzbekistan, with China, India also perhaps interested. Anyone who's an immediate neighbor has the most interest, with Iran for sure, to try and bring home the point that if this level of insecurity is felt within the neighboring countries, because as the UN reports repeatedly say, I think when it comes to internal security, things are very different. But when it comes to the security that the neighbors are feeling, things are, again, very different. I don't think any country has the vantage point to be able to dictate to the Afghans as to how they live and what they do at all. And the thing that you want to do is, as my very esteemed colleague mentioned, there was a commitment given to the world, to the Peace Committee, about commitment to girls' education, for instance, commitment to, whatever anyone made of 2.0. I was one of the first people who said, when everybody started saying, oh, they are now going to, I've said, let's wait for things to change before we start celebrating change, right? We are where we are. The reality is what it is. So sometimes you want the world to, you can wish the world to be what it is, but the world is what it is. And you have to engage, deal with the world as it is, to be able to effect the change that you want. Disengagement has never led to any answers.
But
for the
what
people
does
who are still stuck
engagement
there.
mean? What does engagement from Pakistan's perspective mean?
I mean, look, there is many forms of engagement. There is a bilateral engagement. For the bilateral engagement, of course, we have lots of questions on the security side, which I have already alluded to. We have also lots of questions on how they manage, for instance, if you use the name of Islam and decide that Muslim girls should not go to school, that has an impact on us, right? But as an Eastern country, we like to do most of our diplomacy behind closed doors, and we do not believe that diplomacy, which is on stages in Munich, has a lot of impact, because it does the opposite of what diplomacy is supposed to do, which is engineer change. So we do all of those conversations, behind closed doors. I happen to be, I think, the first official woman minister to land in, so to speak, Taliban land, right? And that wasn't to, that was to give some very, very strong advice and some strong, but talking about it publicly, I think, goes against the essence of why we go there, why you engage, because you engage to try and create some change.
Okay, Fawzia doesn't seem to be of the same opinion. So the question is, what do you, as a opposition leader of a women movements leader, expect from the outside world? You are living in exile, so what is the perspective of your movement?
Well, I think, Catherine, the situation is in a way in Afghanistan that Taliban are a product of the region by the global north money, the money that was sent to Afghanistan to defeat the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was defeated, but also that money was used to create and empower radicalization in the region. And now neither the region nor the global north knows how to manage the situation. It's a devil that's out of control. I think the regular narrative that the global north has is that as long as Afghanistan doesn't pose a real time security challenge for your borders, you're not going to have a strategic perspective beyond humanitarian aid to change the status quo. And you think that there is no real threat, while on the contrary, I believe that, and we all remember before 2001, when we were warning the world that, you are going to face the consequence of what we are experiencing. And this 2001 11 September attack happened. So again, it's a matter of clock ticking before an explosion happened, because the expectation that Taliban are there to protect the global security, it's a wrong expectation, because Taliban are a challenge for the global security. And then the region expectation is basically the relationship is shaped based on three narratives. Economic, which is mainly trade, and on that Taliban have most economic relations with Iran and Pakistan, and also Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries, and China, definitely. It's based on security, counter-terrorism, and counter-narcotics. Security, there are still 23 to 25 military extremist groups that operate in Afghanistan that could be threat. TTP is just one. For many years, we were, asking Pakistan, our dear country, Iran, and other countries not to provide sanctuary to the Taliban leaders and to their fighters, because we know some of their leaders lived in Pakistan, because this might come to you, the flame will come to you, and it's happening now. I feel sorry for those people who lose lives in Pakistan because of this, but it's a reality that TTP has, based on Pakistan claim sanctuary in Afghanistan. The same with other movements from military extremist movements from Central Asia. And Taliban are using this as a leverage point for their relationship. So it's not a strategic alignment. It's basically a tactic from the region. And how long they can keep the tactic is another issue. So that's why, I think we have to really have a strategic view, rather a political perspective, without changing the political circumstances and the political ecosystem. The efforts to fix Taliban and not fix Afghanistan is a failed effort. How long are we going to fix Taliban? And we were told that Taliban have changed. They will be fixed. Let's engage with them. We can probably bring some Muslim women, some Muslim men, others. They will change. Now, my plea to the Muslim world is,
why to the Muslim world?
Initially,
not to the whole world.
Initially to the Muslim world, because I see my sister coming from a Muslim country where they had a female foreign minister, a female prime minister. and also female Speaker of Parliament, where women do not face the same issue as they face in Afghanistan, is the Taliban are creating more Islamophobia than anybody else. So we must stop them, because they have a wrong perspective of Islam. I think pressure is the only, for now, the only answer. And eventually, you need to give space for political opposition to breathe and survive and create an alternative for Afghanistan. Everyone talks about political opposition, democracy, women's rights, but even for us as women movement, to have that space to strategize our efforts, it's not easy, Catherine. So I think the region should engage with all sides, so should the global north, because the global north has an international obligation. We need to make sure that the voices of voiceless people are heard. We need to make sure that people trust the system, the international rule and order. We need to look beyond humanitarian aid. I feel heartened when I see that I represent a country which is rich in nature. And Jason, you have been there. You served twice, right? Or at least served once and visited the other time. And Hena Rabbani, it's a country, and you have been to Afghanistan. Most of people in this room have been to Afghanistan. It's not only that it's a beautiful country, young nation, it is also a rich country, billions of dollars underground in terms of the natural resources. But it makes me, it makes my heart melt when I see that my people beg on the streets for humanitarian aid, which is not even sustainable, right? And for women to queue as beggars, and it's allowed to be a woman beggar in Afghanistan, but it's not allowed to work as women, to have a dignified job. And I think it's a moral conscious failure of the world if we just forget Afghanistan and we think that it's not in our border. It is going to come to our border. Just 4 days ago, Security Council had a meeting assessing the security risks from Afghanistan, and then identified Daesh, which is inspired by Taliban's victory, as a potential risk. So therefore, I think we need to look beyond humanitarian aid and beyond day-to-day business. We need to prepare ourselves for post-Taliban, because post-Taliban is coming. It's unpredictable. Post-Taliban will be with the Taliban. The elements of Taliban that believe in coexistence, we want to include them, but with women, with the rest of transformed Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is a transformed country. It has transformed, at least in the last 20 years. I come from a village. I'm a mountain girl. When I went to my village, people would ask me, who is going to be next president of United States? Is it going to be President Obama or Hillary Clinton? These are the village women. Mm-hmm. These are the transformed women. So we need to listen to that transformed people of Afghanistan and help them. I'm not saying you come and sign another national unity government agreement for us. No. I'm just saying that give us the space so we can have our own narrative, lead our narrative, together with some elements of Taliban. I'm not completely against engagement with, I'm advocating for a principled engagement, an engagement that there is a result at the end of this. And that will happen only when we have a strategic perspective of a political process.
So what is interesting in this respect, the US, with your new president, is changing politics. We see a cut of US aid, which has a tragic effect on Afghanistan. Do you see that Afghanistan still is on the agenda of the United States, that there is a perspective for what Faustia said, a support for democratic movement? Or where do you head? Where does your country head?
Well, I think it's safe to say that I disagree with most things that this new administration does.
Yeah.
That's not to say that I'm not going to try to find ways to work with them, because I've never been an elected official who takes the, I disagree with you, so I'm going to completely shut you out. Because if you do that, then everybody gets nothing. And that's just not going to work. I also am not the type of elected official that responds only to the prevailing winds of public sentiment and political will. I believe that leaders have to shape it. Mm-hmm. Like if something is on the agenda because we put it on the agenda, because we elevate it and make it important. So continuing to do this and continuing to force discussions around it legislatively, publicly, politically is something that I'm engaging to do. So with that said, what I think we need to do in the United States politically, if we're going to figure out a new way of dealing with Afghanistan and helping Afghanistan and I think this can apply to a lot of our foreign engagements, is recognize some hard truths. The first is that real lasting positive change anywhere in the world rarely comes from the outside. It's rarely forced, right? Across the board, almost all of our attempts to kind of come in and create a democracy and nation build have failed. We do not have a good track record of it. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That's number one. Number two, if we recognize that most real and lasting change comes from the inside and it has to come from the people themselves, then the question becomes, how do we support those people and how do we encourage that? And I think that also takes a recognition that our model of economic sanctions is largely broken. Right? There is this notion, not entirely, there are some very good examples of how it works, but this general model that we will impose broad-based economic sanctions on a country and a region, and that will put pressure on a malign ruling entity or government and force people to resist that government, actually does not work. Right? It hasn't really worked in Iran, and hasn't really worked in Cuba, hasn't really worked in Venezuela, hasn't really worked in Russia. It generally does not work. So if we really want to be honest about that, then the question becomes, how do we then allow aid and support to flow in these regions while not supporting malign or malignant actors, but encouraging people to pursue self-determination and pursue their rights? Because what I've learned is that people cannot resist if they are hungry, if they are afraid, if they are sick, right? So cut off of food aid, cut off of medical aid, these things never really work and they blow back on us.
So you're an advocate for help, first of all, on the basic level, food and contribution to help?
I am, because I believe in the proper application of external power and internal power and influence, right? So there is a moment for military involvement, although I think our 20-year war on terror shows very clearly the inherent limitations of military power and what happens when you actually view things almost exclusively through a security lens that doesn't really produce results and lasting change. There is a moment for that, and there is a time for the application of that. But you know, helping encourage internal change has to be more our focus.
Okay, thank you. I would like to open to questions from your side, if you have, and let me know to whom a question. Yes?
Thank you. I'm Hannah Neumann. I'm a member of the European Parliament and also one of the few that's already sent food into Taliban land. Two comments that both will lead to questions, don't worry. The first one on engagement with Afghanistan. And it troubles me that when we say engagement with Afghanistan, everybody immediately starts discussing what do we do with the Taliban, as if that were all of Afghanistan. And we have to face a lot of difficult political decisions in which former US administrations, the Taliban, and everyone else puts us in. But we have a lot of very smart Afghan people in European countries, in the US, in the UK, that we could ask for advice. Why don't we bring them together as a council that also gives us advice that informs our own decision-making, so that we need to talk to the Taliban, clearly. There's no way we can bring humanitarian aid without somehow coordinating with them. I'm not saying recognizing, I'm saying talking to them. But why don't we, if they deny women to sit on these tables where we talk with them, why don't we say, okay, we don't accept that, we just at least build another table where we talk to the women, to all these democratic forces, and then the two of them are informing our decision-making. I don't get it why we're not doing that, because Fausia is here, she's by far not the only one. So why being asked, what do we do with Afghanistan all the time, we talk of the Taliban? The second point, because there are some American friends in this room. When I hear the new plans that Trump has to solve Ukraine, it reminds me a lot of the Afghanistan playbook. So leaving out the people that matter, the Ukrainians, leaving out the region, but counting on the region to bury the costs. And then when trusting on promises that the other will surely never keep, and when it gets dirty, just disappear. And that worries me a lot. There's no question to that, sorry.
Thank you for these remarks. Hina, you seem to
I think, look,
react.
it's been a very difficult position, okay? And I just want to be a little bit crudely honest in this whole scenario, because I happen to be also a woman. I happen to be also a mother of 2 girls and a boy. And I say this on the record, and I've said it to our counterparts in Afghanistan, that if someone were to come today and tell me that my 2 girls cannot go to school and my boy can, I would either leave the country or do whatever I can against the people who will refuse to let my... So I feel it, I understand it, but as I said, I think we need to get the perspective. We did not leave Afghanistan. By we, I mean the international community, because I think we were all part of an effort where the US had 100,000 troops, but the Europeans also had troops. People gave lives. People spent $2.3 trillion, all for a purpose, right? And at the end of the day, after 21 years, what did we have to show for it? That's a hard truth. And the other hard truth is, did we leave because the circumstances were now opportune for a departure? Or did we leave because the interests no more demanded or dictated our presence and we wanted to look elsewhere? That's the hard reality. Now, you fast forward that hard reality and come to where we are today. I'm also we were in office when, the departure happened. Or no, we were not in office, but right after that we were in office. And I was not in office, but still had, some friends in the Foreign Office. So I got calls from very well-meaning friends at very high positions all over Europe and America to try and get person A, woman B, family D out because they felt so passionately, and I felt for them. And you tried to do whatever you could to help. And then after that, when we were in office and there was this talk about economic sanctions to basically ensure that everybody over there starves, my question to everyone was, how many people are you willing to take out of Afghanistan into your own countries? And if you're able to take 10, 20, 100, 200, 1 million, what about the 42 million people left? Should those girls, because they cannot go to school, then starve? Is that our answer? And that can't be a good answer, right? So the interest change, that's a reality. How many times, I've been coming to the Munich Security Conference many years now, almost, maybe not a decade, but many years. Afghanistan used to be all over the place, okay? People would jump in their seats wanting to talk about Afghanistan. And now we like Afghanistan, people like, look the other way. Interest change. That's the hard reality. So to bring, and I've never agreed with a US representative as much as I agree with you when you say this, because I think it's really important. It's really important not to just get out and forget about the promises, the commitments, the credibility gaps that come. Those promises were made by no less than presidents of the United States of America about ensuring women's safety, women's security, ensuring that they go to school. And they said they went to war so that women could be, right? And then they left. That's the hard reality. The region, less, but Afghan people had to suffer through the consequences of those world politics or events or change of interest. That's the hardcore reality. I will never be in the favor of starving those who are left within the territory of Afghanistan because the people who are governing them are not giving them their rights. That's just how I see things, right? And I would look for an opportunity, and I completely agree with Representative Jason when he says this, that as my own example, and Fawzia gave that example of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto as a leader had to struggle through a dictator's. Women came out on streets, and so that space has to be provided when people are not left to die. But if we think our solution is, let's do economic sanctions so people can't die, and I know I'm taking more time than I meant to, but let me give you a simple example. We were trying to support female education in Afghanistan after the Taliban came, and we said that we will give the, as Pakistan, we said that we will give the salaries for women, girls' schools. There was no way that we could transfer funds from Pakistan to Afghanistan because of the economic sanctions. No banks were working. Is this how you think you can engineer a change? I think starving people because you want them to have their rights is never a good solution, and I just think it's counterproductive.
Thank you for your clear words.
Thank you. I'm a representative of Kazakhstan, so let me bring Central Asian perspective on Afghanistan. Actually, in Central Asian states, interest for Afghanistan is getting more and more important. Probably partly because of situation in Ukraine. Kazakhstan has proximity both to Afghanistan and Ukraine. And after the war has started in Ukraine, we are trying to diversify our transit routes. And one of the ways is getting our commodities to South Asian states through Afghanistan. And we are ready to invest to Afghanistan. We are ready to develop our ties with Afghanistan alongside with other partners. But still, it's still very risky for Kazakhstani companies. And there is no guarantees. There is no chance to invest. So what would you advise? What shall we do in Kazakhstan particularly? Because I agree that Taliban is not the main kind of, is not the only side of the, is not only the subject in Afghanistan, but still we have to face reality that Taliban is the power right now in Afghanistan. So what shall we do?
Maybe we can broaden this a bit, because your question, I think, perfectly represents the helpless position of the neighbors and also of the international community, how to deal with the Taliban. Fawzia, maybe you can help us.
Right. Before that, I mean, I appreciate the fact that Hina Rabbani and people like her advocate for people in Afghanistan. True that we should not ban people. I sometimes, when I talk to my constituents, women and men who voted for me with master and PhD degrees, a very dignified career, they ask me to send them $20 because now they lost everything. They lost the job. Afghanistan has $3 billion deficit to our economy because of the fact that women do not work. From a time where 25% women were in parliament to the time that 0% women in any public sphere. So even if you send humanitarian aid, which I do believe we should send, and as I said, it actually makes me feel bad because Afghanistan is a rich country and we still depend and big on humanitarian aid. But that humanitarian aid is important, and advocating for people to have access to that is important, but it's equally important for those people who actually were forced to leave their houses and their country. You know, they say no one wants to leave their home unless your home is not in the mouth of shark. Millions of people had to take enormously dangerous routes. Now, even if it's for economic security, whatever motive, I'm nobody to advise them to stay in their country if I'm not in the country. And if their daughters cannot go to school and if they are not safe in their homes, obviously they have no other choice but to leave. Most of them happen to be in Pakistan. And Pakistan and Iran has really, generously hosted people from Afghanistan throughout. Now they expel them. And you know, when people heard about me coming to here, they quickly created a WhatsApp group, thanks to technology, added me to a WhatsApp group where hundreds of people were in that WhatsApp group, and they were in Pakistan. They were like, Ms. Kufi, can you tell this to the Pakistan officials? Can you tell that to there is an expectation. So I think the most important and urgent humanitarian case is to stop expelling those people who live in Pakistan and they're awaiting their final destination. Truly, some of them, when they return to Afghanistan, they face a security challenge, especially those women. So I think this is like, these are part of the 43 million people that you were referring, Madam Kar. These are part of the people that actually had to leave their country. So I really request you and your government, you are in the parliament, you are the chairperson of International Relations Committee, to stop expulsion of people who have access.
Let's focus on the question.
On the question of the region.
Not only the region. Let's make this a bit broader because we don't have much time.
Right.
And I think that a lot of countries are struggling with that question. How do we get a right position? We can only follow your perspective. We can't make
there
up.
There was an independent assessment report done by the UN special rapporteur who appointed a Turkish diplomat to do a report on Afghanistan. One of the main findings of the report was the need for a political process. I think whatever the world, including the region, does is temporarily, right? You want to tactically keep the Taliban as they are in the situation. But this is not sustainable. A political process engaged with all sides, especially Central Asian countries, engagement with all sides, giving them the space to dialogue, to talk, and to see what is best for their country. That is the key, because as I said, it's easy to talk about this, but for us it's very difficult to even convene a meeting beyond our computers. So give the space to all. If you go to Afghanistan to meet the Taliban, talk to others to hear a different perspective, because Taliban are one reality, so that we form a political process where the Taliban will be part of it, but the rest of the society in Afghanistan will be that. Without having that political perspective, as I said, a strategy for a political perspective, and I hope President Trump and his administration will focus on that, not just send humanitarian aid or do short-term businesses with a power that is not even legitimate, but focus on a long-term political change. And to my European people who are freedom-loving and Central Asia, South Asia, Muslim countries, also, bring those who are actually perpetrators of human rights violation to justice, because this will become a trend. Nobody will be safe. You are not also going to be safe.
Jason, you wanted to
add
to that point.
Thank you for the question. Unlike our vice president, I generally am not in the business of lecturing other countries on their domestic politics.
Yeah.
But since you asked, no, I'm not going to talk to you about your domestic politics. What I'm going to say is, we need to capture people's attention, our constituents' attention, and we need to make the public case as to why this should matter to them. Right? That's what we do as elected officials, and we have to take sometimes abstract, seemingly distant issues and make them real for folks. So the business case, and I'm not using business in the formal sense, but kind of the general public case is we have to, one, make it clear that there is an interest for the world in our constituents in Afghanistan. Right? You have an incredibly young population, a dynamic population, and an educated population. 43 million. The majority of those are educated and grew up and came of age and know freedom, know a form of democracy, and know something different than what the Taliban have to offer. So you're dealing with a very healthy, vibrant population. You're dealing with a resource-rich country in a lot of ways, natural resources, other resources, and a country with an extremely strategic geopolitical location, geographically. Right? So all three of those things should make it very compelling for any of our people and countries to engage and to have a policy. The last piece is what I think we need to do is there needs to be a collective multinational effort to come to an agreement as to what we expect the Taliban to do. Very specific, right? And some of those is allow women and girls back in schools, certain crackdowns, some element of freedom. We have to be realistic about it, right?
You can ask them, but if there's no consequences...
The second piece is very clear expectations, coupled then with very clear things we are willing to do and provide if they meet milestones.
Give us an example.
Like women and girls back in school. Mm-hmm. Right? That is one they committed to before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? They were at least willing to commit to. And it's very clear, and it's verifiable. It's something we know, right? And we can measure, right? So we say that, and in exchange for that, then we figure out ways for aid to flow. We figure out ways to support an education system, because they also have the challenge of governing. And guess what? Governing, in many ways, is harder than fighting, right? You can keep your coalition together when you're at war and fighting. When you have to govern, that's sometimes very difficult to do, and that's the challenge they're facing. So they're incentivized to some degree to do that. But we have to be clear. There has to be a large enough international coalition to do it, and then we have to set benchmarks, enabling objectives that are clear and things that we are willing to provide to continue to incentivize them to move down a more positive path.
Thank you very much. As we are running to the end, I want to give the last word to Fawzia. So we have one more minute. Briefly, what is your perspective for the near future? So what will we see happening in Afghanistan?
I think there will be more division among Taliban, which will give us the leverage, but we need to prepare ourselves. The political opposition, the civic movement need to prepare ourselves. But on the question of what should the world do, Catherine, in 2001, when the world decided to go to Afghanistan, they never asked anybody from Afghanistan, what should we do? They went because their interest was at stake. So they will decide when their interest is at stake. And women and human rights is never a matter of interest for international decision-making and strategies. Also, education is not, Jason, not the only issue. Suppose if tomorrow they allow girls to go to madrasas, which are the religious school, we have a generation of women Taliban. Is it going to help Taliban, Afghanistan? So yes, education, but quality education and education that actually helps Afghanistan, and a secular education we want, an education that was before. With that, I would like to thank you, and I think if you do not stand with people of Afghanistan, tomorrow you're going to face the consequence.
Thank you very much to all of you for this very fascinating insight in a moment where Afghanistan is at a moment maybe of change. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for your questions. Thank you.